so we're delayed then. And I'd done very well at the card school the night before. There were 6 of us. And I decided I would have a wind-up. So when we got on the aircraft, my 5 colleagues were at a 6-seater table. And I sat in a seat across and behind and said, you're not getting your money back. I made up my mind that when we took off at Munich after refueling, I would join the party. And I fell asleep, got a lot of cushions, and fell asleep in a 2-seater. And I woke up as we came in to land at Munich, and okay, now today they talk about high cloud base and low cloud base. I didn't know what it was. We were nearly in the ground before we realised we were down. It was snowing slightly, footprints in the snow. Everybody got off, went in. We don't know what we're doing in the aircraft. And a few minutes later, we're called on board the aircraft, which everybody joined the aircraft. I went back to my usual 2-seaters, again saying I would join the party. In my own mind, they didn't know it, after we'd taken off. And everybody was quite happy. There was nothing untoward about it. I was sitting 2 seats from the bulkhead. The second seat from the bulkhead behind me was Ted Elliard and Peter Howard. Across from me was Bobby Charlton and David Pegg, acting the clown, and in front of them was the 5-seater card school. Set off down the runway, and I'm looking out the window and just watched the telescopic leg that holds the wheels extend, and the point of lift, and then watch the wheels lock and unlock. The plane swerve about a little bit. The pilot got her stopped, and someone come over the telecom and said that we'll go back and have another attempt, technical hitch. And we went back to the beginning again and set off down the runway and went a little bit further this time. And again I watched, and I wasn't terribly unnerved at all. It was like a speedboat at sea. The snow was getting a little bit deeper, consequently you had a bow wave of the snow. And again the extension of the telescopic legs. And again the wheels locked and unlocked. And I would say to this day, because there was no end product in the first 2 attempts, it was more hair-raising. That sounds strange, but it was a bit unnerving. They come on and they said that we would go back to the terminal and the party would disembark, which we did do. Within 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, we were called back on board the aircraft. And I must say, in retrospect, the first time that we attempted to take off, there was a slap on the brakes, and I felt terribly sorry for the steward because he was thrown out of the galley and strapped himself across from me and behind me beside the lady and the child. She was nursing the child in an empty seat, strapped himself in, and he looked very frightened. On the 3rd attempt to take off, and I wasn't too unnerved at that time, till I turned in the back door of the aircraft, and as I turned in, Tom Cable, the steward, was strapped in the back seat. And I thought, hey, maybe this is a bit more hairy than what I believed. I went back to my seat, and Billy Folks was sitting directly in front of me. And Bill wouldn't be as tall as me, and there was a huge bulkhead above his head and mine where the wings joined the body. And in my own simple way, I thought, if this thing belly flops, he's going to bash his brains in. So I made a point of getting well down below the back of my seat, opening the front of my trousers, a soft part of my body, and opening my collar and tie, and putting my feet up on the chair in front. And we started to roll, and someone said, there's one missing. There was a head count, and it was Alf Clark in the evening news. And he was brought on board the aircraft. Now, Bobby Charlton and David Pegg had moved from where they'd been sitting up across from me, and Frank Taylor was there. They'd gone to the back of the aircraft, or halfway down the aircraft. And we set off again, and I was reading a book that wasn't too kind to how I'd been brought up, and I put it down because I thought to myself, here, if I get killed here and I'm reading that book, I'll go to hell, which was a way of life in those days. And I kept watching the whales and watching the whales, and I thought we're away this time because again the rods extended, but we'd been places we hadn't been before. And now there was no way I could look in front of me or behind me to see what was going on, because you can't look down the side of an aircraft. I didn't see end of fence, I just saw in my eye line out the window. And we passed places we hadn't been to before, and to my point of view I thought she lifted. And all of a sudden there was a horrendous upside down, 1 minute daylight, next minute darkness, just tearing and ripping and smoke and flames. And I got hit. The first thump I got was in the back of the head. Next one I got was the front of the head. I felt something going up my nose. Just didn't know what was going on at all. All of a sudden it all stopped. While it was rending and tearing, I'd just come to United. I'd just been married, had one child. And in my own simple mind, I thought I'd done well for the first time in my life. And I won't see my wife, my little girl again. And I won't see my parents. And I can't speak German. All completely and totally in slow motion. Then it was nothing but darkness, and I thought, I'm in hell because it's black. I just lay there for a while, and I felt the blood going down my face, and I was afraid to reach up in case of what I'd find. Now you said, I realised I wasn't dead. I reached down to unfasten my safety belt. There was nothing there, and there was some burning, sparkling wires. And off to my right, above me, above my height, and to my right, I seen a hole and seen daylight, and I started to crawl towards it. I crawled over the top of one or two people in the darkness, and I looked out through the hole, and directly below me was lying Bert Wally, he was team coach, wearing an Air Force blue suit, and his eyes wide open. He had one eye, the glass eye, and there wasn't a mark on him. And eventually I made the hole bigger and dropped down beside Bert. And in the distance I could see 5 people running through the snow. And they were shouting, run, run, it's going to explode. And I just stood there. I think the fear factor was gone, I don't know. And around what was left of the cockpit came the captain saying, and shouted, run, you stupid bastard, it's going to explode, and ran back the way it'd come. And just then I heard a child crying, and I shouted, come back, there's people alive in here. And they shouted, run. And I went back crawled back in, and I was terrified of what I was going to find. I'd seen a child in a rabbit suit or a romper suit of the day or the era. I found it, and thank God there was nothing in it. And eventually I found a child under a lot of rubbish, crawled out, ran towards the people running, and the radio operator came back and met me, and I gave him the child, and he took off. And I went back in again, and I found the mother, and the mother was in a shocking state, and I physically kicked her through the hole and sent her on her way. I found Woody, and I was sure Woody was dead. I couldn't get him out. I didn't know whether he was living or dead. I couldn't get him out. And then the worst one was Albert Scanlon. And Albert was in a terrible way, and he was trapped by the feet, and I had to put him down. I got out and went round what was left of the back of the aircraft, which was nothing, and I found Bobby Charlton and Dennis Filan hanging half in and half out of the stump of the aircraft, and I dragged them by the waist of their trousers and left them hanging over a lot of rubbish about 15 yards away. Got round to the other side of the aircraft, and I think at that point I realised how bad it was, because the rest of the plane there was a roof of a house, and then after that the rest of the aircraft was nose down in what was supposed to be a fuel store. Between that and the part of the aircraft I'd come out of I found the boss, and the boss was he was sitting up on his elbows with his hands across his chest, and he was moaning. I said, you're okay, boss? He had a bad cut behind his right ear, but it wasn't bad compared to what I'd seen. He had a cut behind his right ear, and other than that, it didn't look too bad till I looked at his foot, and his foot was completely bent back the opposite way. But I thought I can leave him. I said, you're okay, boss? And I shoved a lot of rubbish under his back to support his back, and went another 15, 20 yards and found Jackie Bline's floor, and Jackie was crying, and the snow was melting round him because of the heat and the plane burning and the explosions. And he was crying, he broke his back, he was paralysed. And I looked, and Roger Barron was lying across him. And Roger didn't have a mark on him. Handsome fella, handsome in death, handsome in life. And I don't think Jackie realised it was Roger's body that was holding him down. Just kept talking to Blanchy, and when I looked, his right arm was almost severed. And I took my tie off and tried to tie it around his arm, and I broke my tie. And at that point I looked up, and one of the stewardesses was standing looking down at me. And I said, for Christ's sake, get me something to tie his arm with. But the poor girl was in shock and dazed, so I tied his arm with what was left of my tie, and stayed with him. And eventually a fella turned up in a tweed coat and a medical bag, and every time he went to go near anybody, this thing would explode and he would run, till eventually he slipped on his backside with a hypodermic up in the air. People came from across the fields, from a railway track, from a road. Ordinary people, not rescued people. I didn't see any of those at all. And eventually a Volkswagen with a side entrance and a tailgate arrived, and it was a coal van, and Jackie was put into it. Little Johnny Berry, who I didn't know who he was, I didn't even know he was a player until I saw the badge. Myself and Billy Folks, Dennis Violet, and we were driven through the snow to the hospital. And it was, I don't think anybody, even myself, realised how bad it was. I remember breaking down at the time and crying when I seen one or two more and thought, thank God somebody else is alive. In the hospital, we got together. There was Ted Elliott, Peter Howard, Bobby Charlton, a big Yugoslav, Billy Folks and myself. And some of us were asked to go and identify people that we're working on. And I remember going to identify one. It was Ray Wood, and they were working on his eye, and he was on the floor. They were working everywhere on them. Eventually, they took the rest of us to give us a bowl of soup, and walking down the corridor, the big Yugoslav collapsed and slid down the wall. He'd been walking about with a broken leg, which gave way. They took the rest of us to a room, and they started to give us an injection. They gave me an injection, told me to get on the table or the bed, and I said, I'm not staying. I rolled off it. They gave Bill one, and Bill followed my suit, and he gave Bobby an injection, and Bobby Charlton fainted. Hence he was kept in hospital. Bill, Ted Elliott, Peter Howard, and myself were taken to a hotel, the Stahouse Hotel, where the people were wonderful. People that have been forgotten. I suppose people do become forgotten in life. The manager, a wonderful guy, kept us away in the top of the building until somebody turned up from BEA, and eventually the following day, the families turned up. Jimmy Murphy, Mrs. Busby, Sandy, Duncan's father, Gladstone, Jimmy Payne, who was Duncan's best friend, who was a local builder. I remember putting him out of the lift because the press were in everybody's bag, and I suppose I was like a minder with a busted face, and saying, out. He said, I'm not a pressman, I'm Duncan's best friend. Him and I became great friends. Jackie Blanchflower's dad, the wife, Jean Blanchflower. And I would honestly say it, I don't patronise anybody. Jean Busby at that time was remarkable, because you're trying to say to someone, look, your husband's not too bad, or Jackie's not too bad, but there's crying and weeping and wailing. And in fairness to her, she knew how bad man it was, and she was really taking care of everybody. There's no reason why I should say that they patronised. She was very strong, very, very strong. That was basically within. I had to go the following morning to the hospital, because when I tried to get out of bed, it was impossible. I rolled out of bed and was taken to the hospital, and they were giving me injections in the back, till eventually the injections were worse in the back, so I said, okay, it's enough. Jimmy turned up at the hotel, and he asked both Bill and myself would we mind staying for a few days, because he would like those that were lying and were conscious in the hospital to believe that it wasn't as bad as what it was. And eventually Jimmy and Bill and myself went to the hospital, and Professor Moore himself, he took us round. None of them were in wards, they were in operating theatres. And it's not a story. Duncan woke up while we were there, propped up in bed, and he turned his head, saw Jimmy, and said, what time's the kick-off? And Jimmy was quick as hell, said, 3 o'clock, son. And Duncan said, get stuck in, and turned around and gave the nurse a mouthful for not getting him water. Seen all the rest of them, seen the boss. And sadly, little Johnny Berry, who's now dead. I remember Professor Moore on each one saying, 50-50 boss, 50-50 strong man. Jackie Blanchflower, Kay, Duncan, 50-50. When he got to little Johnny Berry, Johnny was wired, fingers and toes, to put him together. He looked at him and he said, no. But who am I? Am I God? And that's one of the remarkable things. Bill and I come home a few days later, and I remember 61 Briarlands Avenue sale. All the papers disappeared about 10 days afterwards. We had painters in, I couldn't figure what the hell was going on. Till I found out Duncan had died. I found that hard. Yeah. That's Munich.